Hey, welcome to Dawn. My name is Dan, and this is a space of contemplation and reflection. So, whenever you're watching this, wherever you're watching this, I hope this time is helpful and gives you some stuff to think about and to reflect on in your life. Have you ever noticed in life that we go through these periods of really difficult times and then we'll come into times that feel a little bit easier and we look back and we're like, it makes the hard times so much worth it because we're in this easy time now. We go into the hard time, we look back at the easier times. It's interesting, isn't it, when we find ourselves in one of those spaces, it can be so easy to throw our minds back. I know in my life when I've had times, and I've often chatted to friends about this, and we were talking about being in school, and some of my friends say, school was just some of the best days for me. And other of my friends will say, school was just some of the worst days for me. I would never want to be back there. While some of them are going, no, I would completely relive school again. Isn't it funny how we throw our minds back to these places sometimes to help us deal with what is in front of us? There's a really interesting passage found in Exodus where the children of Israel, so God's people, they were held in captivity in the nation of Egypt. Now, Egypt was quite a brutal nation, and the Egyptians essentially kept the Israelites as slaves. So they would beat them and they would treat them really badly, and the Israelites had to work for very little. For the Egyptians, they would build stuff and they would work as farmers and public servants and all that sort of stuff. And they're in a really, really difficult period of their lives. Like, to live like this is really painful and difficult, and to raise kids in that whole place, it was not Israel's finest hour in that sense. And then God, you can read it throughout the story of Exodus, God raises up this man Moses and says to Moses, look, I'm going to use you to set my people free. So through a whole chain of events, again, you can go and read this, Moses goes and he essentially leads all the Israelites out of Egypt. Put this into the big picture here. They were slaves in captivity in Egypt. Moses comes, liberates them, and he leads them out of Egypt. They are free now. And they're in the desert and they are heading back to what they call the promised land, the place that God had said, this is where you're going to live. And so they've left captivity, but they're in this weird in-between stage. And they begin to get hungry. They begin to feel a little bit like, Moses, what's going on here? Like, what are you doing? And they begin to moan a little bit. And then we pick up here in Exodus chapter 16, verse 3. And it says this. This is when the Israelites are feeling a little bit hungry. It said, the Israelites said to him, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we were sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death. So essentially what they start saying to Moses is, even though they'd been in the most horrific set of circumstances back in Egypt, they're out in the desert, they're facing this difficult time, and all of a sudden they say to Moses, if only we could be back in Egypt, because there we could eat meat and we could eat all that we wanted to and we were full, whereas out here we are hungry. You are going to starve us to death. It's so interesting. The Israelites, they almost were so short-sighted that they forgot that they were in this place of freedom, even though it was difficult. And they cast their minds back and said, I wish we could be back there, even though it was so painful and horrific, but we got to eat this tiny little desire. See, the same can be true for me and you. Sometimes when God leads us into a place where he's beginning to free us from some things, some of us have some, real dysfunctional habits, some toxic habits in our life that God begins to release us from. He gives us the opportunity to break free from some of this stuff, and sometimes that can be really painful and difficult. Often some of us can find ourselves in times of life where we're heading in the right direction, but actually life is really difficult, and we can cast our minds back to a time where maybe we didn't know Jesus, or a time where we could look back and this one tiny element of it was really good, and I'll throw away all my freedom just to have this one little thing. Often what we tend to forget in those moments when life can feel difficult, we can throw our minds back to the good old days. When really we're just looking at them through rose-tinted glasses. We look at the good old days. Life was so easy back then. But actually we just remember the good things and we forget a lot of the bad things. I want to encourage you, God is calling you into the future. And yes, there's going to be some difficulty, but do not throw away the freedom that God has given you or has to offer you because of one little element that might have been easier in your past. Often one thing we forget in these times of hardship is that God always promises to provide. In the passage just after what we read out in Exodus, God provides amazingly for the children of Israel, and he rains down food from the skies for them to eat. You can read about it, it's an incredible story. And listen to this in Philippians chapter 4 verse 19. This is what I want to leave you with today. It says this, "And my God will meet all your needs according to the riches of his glory in Christ Jesus." Whatever you are facing, even if it is difficult, I want to encourage you, resist the urge to throw your mind back to the easier times, but instead to lean into Jesus, lean into all that he is calling you into. And remember that he always promises to provide no matter what it is you are facing. You're not on your own. You don't have to do this on your own. You don't have to try and make it through this on your own. God is with you. He will provide for every single step. So today, I want you to reflect on a few things. The first thing is this. Are there some elements of your life where you are living in your mind back in the good old days, just wishing that you were somewhere else, rather than facing up to the moment and trusting God? Are there some areas of your life that are maybe caught up in your past? Maybe are you looking at some areas of your life through those rose-tinted glasses? Second thing I want you to reflect on is this. Are there some areas of your life that you need to give back to God and trust him that he will provide? Maybe it's financial, maybe it's for your health, maybe it's for your children, maybe it's your career or a house or something big that you've got going on in your life. Maybe just reflect and begin to thank God that he is a provider. Maybe you haven't seen his provision this far. Maybe you haven't recognized his provision this far. Well, I want to encourage you, begin to thank him that he is a provider. Trust him to provide. Reflect on those few things. I hope today has been helpful and left you with some things to contemplate and to meditate on. And remember that God is always with you. See you soon.